Good afternoon, everybody. This is the welcome to the third EUPATI webinar on the guidances, and in this case we are going to talk about the guidance for patient involvement in regulatory processes. While people are joining, I am going to at least start already with introducing the people participating in this webinar from our side. The presenter will be David Harry. David is a patient rights activist. He has been active in a very broad range of HIV/AIDS related issues, including medicines development, regulatory issues, biomedical prevention research, and so on. He has been co-chairing the Patient and Consumer Working Party at the European Medicines Agency, and works with the Swiss Medic, the Swiss agency, on patient involvement in regulatory processes. He has been co-leader together with me in Work Package 7 in EUPATI, which was overseeing the development of the different guidelines, or guidances rather. We have two panelists to support him and answer questions which you might want to pose. The first one is Podola Landgraf. She is a licensed pharmacist and has been within regulatory affairs and the environment of regulatory affairs for more than 15 years. She is currently responsible for the networking at the Swiss Medic, the Swiss Agency for Therapeutic Products. And in this position, Cordona coordinates both national and international cooperation and is the first point of contact for Swiss Medic's various stakeholders. Among others, and that is the most important, I think, she chairs the Swiss Medic Working Group with patients and consumer organizations. The second panelist is Giulio Maria Corbelli. Giulio is a member of the EATG, the European AIDS Treatment Group. He is chair of the European Community Advisory Board, which is a working group of the EATG. A member of the Policy Working Group. He is a member of the Executive Committee for a variety of different studies, networks, and he is a member of the editorial board for the EUPATI. In Italy, he is a member of the board of directors of PLUS, the first network of people living with HIV, and not the least, a member of the panel for the anti-retroviral guideline at the Italian Ministry of Health. He works as a freelance journalist for magazines and websites. And I am, for the first time in my life, moderating this webinar. My name is Wolf C. I'm a physiologist by training, consultant to Bayer at the moment. I'm retired, and mostly working for the IMI education and training projects. I have had 25 years in various positions in industry and have been working in university until 5 years ago. And as I said already, together with David, I was co-lead of Work Package 7, which was responsible for the guidance production. I think I would like to also point out that this is the third webinar in a row of 4. At the last webinar will be on the guidance on patient involvement in HTA on July 5. Maybe you want to make a note. Also, I want to mention that if you want to have access to the documents in the handouts you received and in the invitation as well, you have links to these documents, so you just click on them if you want to see them on your screen right away. And one more housekeeping remark, you should type your questions as they occur. We have planned stops for questions which arrive, and we will do that as they will arrive, and if David says, okay, here we have a stop, and then I'm going to pass on these questions to the panelists. Okay, and now I would like to hand over to David to start his presentation. David, over to you.
Thank you very much, Wolf. I'm starting the slideshow. And here we go. Sorry. Is everything okay? I hope, yes. So we are going through the presentation. We will look at why we have the guidance. We will quickly go through the process we followed. We will look at the content of the regulatory guidance, some of the key points within each chapter, referencing the guidance document, and finally have enough time for questions. Why the guidance is, and this is now a standard presentation we had with all the guidances. We wanted to produce something that helps patients and their organizations to be more widely involved, including early and post-approval stages, and not confined to clinical development. And we also realized that overarching guidance on meaningful and ethical interaction was missing in many areas, especially in research and development, and this is causing insecurity. Now, with the regulatory guidance, we were in the lucky situation to build on a very mature framework of interaction built by the European Medicines Agency. And this framework of interaction covers all areas and aspects in regulatory processes along the product life cycles. However, the EMA framework and the recommendations apply to the EMA remit only, and the aspects relevant to national competent authorities were missing, which is something we did when we developed this guidance. Today we have the 4 guidances on industry-led R&D, on health technology assessment, on regulatory processes, and on ethics committees. All the material went through an extensive public consultation, which ended in September 2016, and the material was published and translated since September 2016. Now, is there any question at this point about the why and how and what we did? If there is no question, I would continue. A little bit of history. The patient's experience with regulators actually has a history, and it goes back to 1988, when the American FDA introduced its patient representative program after having been locked down by protesting HIV activists. They called the FDA the Federal Death Administration. From that time, the FDA employed more than 200 people with a part-time job to advise the FDA on a range of 300 to 400 diseases. In 2016, the FDA then announced a new working group with patient advocacy organizations, which is based on the EMA model, on the Patient and Consumer Working Party model. Because the FDA model has not evolved a lot since 1988, and they found the European model to be interesting, and I understand that they are currently working on its implementation in the US. Now, the European Medicines Agency had informal contacts with my organization from 1997 when we knocked at their door. They opened in '96. And in 2000, patients joined the Committee for Orphan Medicinal Products as full members. And that was the first time public interaction was established. In this critical committee, Orphan Medicinal Products, the patients were the first to become full members in this working committee. Then in 2003, a working group with patient organizations was created. In 2004, in a bracket, the European Union introduced legislation covering the collaboration with patient organizations. In 2005, the EMA adopted the first framework of interaction with the patient and consumer organizations, and having the framework, the Patient and Consumer Working Party was created in 2006. This framework of interaction was revised once in 2014, and in 2017 we have a systematic inclusion of patients in EMA regulatory outputs. Now, when we look at the national competent authorities, we have a very mature experience in France. In 2006, the former French regulator, AFSAPS, that doesn't exist anymore, there is a new body now, but AFSAPS initiated a structured interaction with patient groups in 2006, and I think, if I'm right, if I'm not completely wrong, this was the first time a national regulator has embarked in such an exercise. In Switzerland, we have a trial phase ongoing since 2014. The problem with the interaction in Switzerland is the missing legal basis. We have other countries where an interaction is either being planned or already existing. That's Austria, Canada, Germany, Italy, Netherlands, Sweden, and the United Kingdom. This list is not comprehensive. When we look at the overall involvement at the European Medicines Agency, we see a big progress being made from 2008, when the involvement and the engagement was measured. We had 167 interaction points in 2008, and we had 770 in 2016. So that's a five-fold increase over time. The number of interactions measures every time when a patient has been engaged in a process handled by the European Medicines Agency. Is there a question at this point about the different regulators and about the evolving interaction with patients at the European Medicines Agency? If there is no question, I continue. Wolf?
Yeah, no question here.
No question, I continue. What EMA has started in and ended as a trial phase in 2017 is involvement of patients in benefit-risk discussions at the CHMP. And this pilot was closed, was over in spring 2017, and it was successful. When we look at the patient involvement at the EMA, you see it happens pretty much everywhere and in everything the agency is doing. We have involvement in documents production for the public summaries of opinion, package leaflets, EPAR summaries, risk management plan summaries, and safety communication. Patients are contacted when such communication is being prepared. We have involvement pre-submission in orphan designation, in scientific advice and protocol admissions, in the pediatric investigation plan. We have involvement in the evaluation, and we have involvement in the authorization process. And every committee has a defined way of integrating the patient voice in their output. The next slide, here you see the categories of patient participation at the EMA. There are three categories. and 3 ways patients may participate in the agency's work. A, representing patients in general, meaning not their own organization, but the European patients. There are 2 people doing this at the EMA Management Board, and there are a number of people doing this in the EMA scientific committees. Now, patients can also represent their own organizations, and they do so in the Patients and Consumer Working Party, in EMA consultations, and also in EMA workshops. And the third type is when the patient becomes an individual expert, giving his own best advice without being in touch with his organization. And this is in scientific advice, protocol assistance procedures, scientific advisory and ad hoc experts groups, scientific committee consultation, and in the review of documents. At the national level, we have a package leaflet text review starting in 2017 with Swissmedic, and it's a little bit based on what is already established at the EMA, a focus on readability, understandability, completeness in new product applications. It is a bit a complex undertaking in Switzerland because due to the missing legislation, the companies can only be involved on a voluntary basis. So the companies need to agree that they are happy that the patients participate in this exercise, and I hope many will agree with that. Then the documentation around this guidance production is the European Regulation EC 726 from 2004, Article 78. This is the legal basis for all the interaction with the patients at European level. Finally, the EMA framework for interaction, which was already mentioned. There has been a code of practice developed by some patient organizations and the healthcare industry, developed by PCWP members on their own side. And finally, the EUPATI guidances on engagement with industry and regulatory processes, the one we have here. So this is the end of the presentation, and before I switch to the guidance itself, I would again ask if there are any questions at this point. Wolf, any question?
Nothing yet in questions, but I have a comment by Alexandre Duplan. He says, if you talk about the ex-AFSAPs in France, please see the HAS in charge of medicines and devices assessment. And Alexandre, you are giving a link, which I think we should include in our webinar recording and publish it afterwards. Thank you.
Okay, if that's everything, I will move now to the guidance itself. And I hope you see it. Wolf, is it okay? Everybody sees the guidance?
It's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
I am not touching on the first page, not on the disclaimer, not on the scope, but perhaps on the definition as a patient. We spend a lot of time on defining the patient, and that's important to bear in mind when you read the guidance material we have produced. We mean individual patients in some contexts. We mean carers. We mean patient advocates. We mean patient organization representatives and patient experts. So all these 5 types of patients can be meant in the guidance material, and you need to go back to the definition once and then to understand what is really understood when we speak about the patient. The rationale I have discussed. The objective of patient engagement in medicines regulation. The aim was to build transparency and trust with the patient's community by the European regulator. I go back to the European Medicines Agency, because they have really pioneered in a certain way the systematic integration of patients in their work. This was very much about supporting the regulator to access the real-life experience of diseases and their management, and to obtain information on the current use of medicines. And also very important to ensure that patients and their representative organizations are listened to, consulted, and involved in the development of policies and plans. I don't go through the other bullets. These two were the most important reasons for making that happening. EMA has also spent a lot of time on work practices, establishing work practices when people are involved in a specific process. Actually, every process was first looked at, piloted, and then a decision was taken on how patients should be included and engaged in the different interactions and the processes.
David, can I interrupt you right here?
Yes.
I have a question by Leona Wagner, and she asks, how can a patient with professional training in clinical data management and MedDRA coding, drug safety analysis, get involved in regulatory processes? I would put that question to you and to Cordona in that sequence.
At the EMA, there is a link on the patient's website. Getting involved, you can register with the EMA, and you indicate your expertise.
Yeah, for Swissmedic, so on a national level, we have this pilot working group with patient and consumer organizations. Here you would have to represent a patient or a consumer organization, and then you can join as member. As this is valid for Switzerland, it should be a Swiss patient or consumer organization. But if you are in another country, maybe best is you contact your local EUPATI platform. And maybe they can then match you to an appropriate regulatory agencies in your country, where your experience might be valued, and you might be then involved there. I don't know from which country you are.
Okay.
I am waiting for Leona to answer.
Okay.
Germany, right?
Okay. Germany has a EUPATI platform, so I think this would be the best solution. Or otherwise, the BfArM, the German authority for medicinal products and medical devices. But here I would have to check who is the best contact person. I don't have a direct.
Okay.
I would continue with defining the interaction. This is also something where we very much build on the EMA experience, that every type of interaction that exists at the regulator has been described, and every interaction is very systematic and follows a certain way of doing things. Patient identification, that's an important one, a little bit relevant for the question that was just asked. Some patients get in touch with the agency, others are part of organizations. The EMA has regular announcements on their website when they look for people to join committees. In order to work with the European Medicines Agency, you need to be a member of an eligible organization, and the eligible organizations for the EMA are listed on the website. and these organizations are also checked on their eligibility criteria. They are checked every 2 years, if I remember well, or even every year, about their focus, about their mission and objectives, and representation, structure, accountability, and transparency. This is how the EMA assesses the organizations they are working with. It's a very thorough process they are following. Compensation is an issue. Until this point, the European Medicines Agency does not pay for the people, but there is a modest compensation being paid to people who come as volunteers, and this is still being reflected upon, I understand, and should find a solution hopefully soon. Implementation and monitoring is very important when regulators work with patients, and the EMA has been doing that very thoroughly. Also, Swissmedic is doing it and looking at the way their pilot is progressing over time. And this would be the end of my presentation. I'm happy to hand over to the moderator and listen to getting more questions. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Yes, the floor is really open, and I would invite everybody who has questions to type them, and then we will hand them over to the panelists. Everything seems to be clear.
If everything is clear, we don't fast. Well, interaction with patients by regulator is something quite established. That may be the reason why we get so little questions. In the other guidance webinars, we had a lot more questions.
There's maybe one. There is one question coming from Christina Clafein. Could you identify required versus voluntary touch points for patients with the EMA? It's either Giulio or David. I hand that over to.
Giulio should answer.
Yeah.
Is Giulio here?
No, he doesn't seem to be. So it would be you, David, to tackle that question. Can we identify required versus voluntary touch points for patients with EMA?
I don't really understand the question, honestly. Required versus voluntary touch points.
Christina, can you please specify what you mean by touch point, either required or voluntary? Okay, Christina answers, are there certain meetings that EMA is required to get patient input?
Oh, yes, of course.
Yeah.
They involve patients in all the workshops they are organizing. When they are member of a committee, they are involved anyway. But when they do workshops, and they have done an increasing number of workshops in the past years, they make sure that enough patients are present to contribute with their voice to the discussion. So that's quite an important point. Everything, when there is something touching on a wider subject, or when the agency is inviting to consultative meetings, the patients are always, it is mandatory for them to have patients in the room. I hope that answers the question. Otherwise, we are dealing with a regulator, which means that the patients are mandatory or by automatically included in the discussion when the pharmacovigilance risk assessment committee is meeting. The patients are part of the meeting. When a scientific advice working group is meeting, the patients are invited to that scientific advice. When there is some other process ongoing where patients are part of the group, of the working group, or of the committee, they are automatically present. But in workshops and the interactions of this type, the EMA makes sure that enough patients are present.
Okay, thank you, David. There is another question coming up, which is more general and not easy to answer. Thank you, Ingrid Klingmann, for asking the following. Obviously, the number of patients involved in national regulatory authority committees and activities is still very limited. Will the EUPATI guidance be able to encourage that more national authorities will develop this collaboration? I would like to hand that over to our national regulatory authority representative, to Podola.
Yes, thank you, Wolf. I think the EUPATI guidance is a good start for regulatory agencies to take this involvement up. But I think what they then have to do is to look for an appropriate way how they can adapt maybe this complete and mature EMA framework to their national specialities, to their national environment. When we were dealing with this question here in Switzerland at Swissmedic, it was clear that we couldn't implement the whole concept due to limited capacity because we are not as big as the EMA. But this framework, this EMA framework, is very, very well structured, and you can take elements out of it and implement that on a national basis. So this was very helpful for us. And I think, yeah, this can help other regulatory agencies to implement certain concepts, certain points of this concept also in their country, in their agency. So I think it's a good starting point, but we still have to raise awareness that you don't have to implement all. It's not all or nothing. You can also start with something and then build it up on that.
I could add that a number of national regulators have started an interaction in the past years. Sweden came back to the table. Spain has started something. Italy has started something. There was quite some movement. Also, Germany has finally moved into this. So along the EUPATI work, there has been quite a wake-up call going through Europe in that sense.
Yes, and maybe I can add that during the development of the guidances, and notably the regulatory guidance or the patient involvement in regulatory processes guidance, regulators were involved in shaping this guidance and commenting extensively during the development, which was a great help, and that also, I think, raised awareness among regulators on what can be done and what might be done. Any more questions?
Wolf, can you hear me? This is Giulio speaking.
Oh, Giulio, yes.
Can you? Oh, yes. Oh, okay. You can hear me. Sorry for the technical problems. I just wanted to add something about the previous question about touch points for engaging in interaction with the EMA activities. I'm not sure David already mentioned this because I missed the first part of his presentation, unfortunately. But the EMA set up a register for interested individuals in who wants to get involved in EMA activities. So maybe this is a good first contact point where you can leave your contact details and also explain your areas of interest and of expertise to get involved with the European Regulatory Agency.
Thank you very much, Julio. I'm glad you are back. Any more questions? Unfortunately, I cannot ask the audience if they have been involved in regulatory activities at their place, which would be of high interest, and whether or not a guidance like this would be a helpful means. If I can pose a question to Julio. If you look at the landscape of the national competent authorities and not concentrate on EMA alone, would you see this venue to be promoted in other countries besides Switzerland, Germany, Austria? Would you see it in your country too?
Sure, definitely. I think it is a useful. I mean, I think we must clarify how important patient involvement can be in regulatory activities in general. And I'm sorry if I'm repeating something that David already explained, but one of the most important issues for patients is to get access to medicines. This is, I mean, sometimes you have very important pharmaceutical tools that can solve some problems related to your health, but you cannot get access to them because of regulatory barriers. This is the simplest example we can have of how important patient involvement can be. Regulatory agencies need to know how important access can be for some specific population, for example. So this is just the first idea we can have, but also trying to improve all the processes to make the regulatory agencies aware of the needs of the patients so that they can proactively do something to meet with these needs is also very, very important. We know that in the European Union, European Economic Area, the role of the European agencies is the most important one, since all the medicines can be approved centrally by the not all the medicines, but most of them. The most important medicines can be approved at the central level, but still some kind of involvement of national competent authorities is always required, or at least maybe not in Germany, but in any other country, as far as I know, it is required. So this is the place where we as patient representatives can play a role to speed up the processes. In Italy, for example, it takes sometimes more than 1 year to get a medicine available in our country after the EMA approval, the European Commission approval. So this is really a huge delay, which provoke many problems to people's health. So to address all these issues, the patient involvement is really crucial, because it is a kind of liaison between the community of patients and the regulatory agencies. So we must, from one side, report from our communities to the authorities to make them more willing to act properly to respond to their needs. On the other hand, if we engage in interaction with national competent authorities, we will be able to report back to our community about all the problems, about all the issues we can have from also bureaucratic point of view in a very simple way. That really affect our health. I think this is really important to make. It is important that we all understand how relevant our contribution there can be.
Mm-hmm. But Giulio, may I ask? You mentioned the accessibility problem for patients. Of a centrally approved product, so a product approved by the EMA. Is that due to the fact that the company is not marketing the product once it is approved in the EU by the EMA, or that reimbursement is still pending? Because if the latter is the case, then the involvement with the HTA bodies would be the appropriate interaction.
I understand.
What is actually the problem?
Yeah, I understand what you mean, Cordona, and I agree with you, of course. But I'm not that much related to the reimbursement processes. I mean, in our country, for example, in Italy, the national competent authority is also the HTA body. So yeah, there is this strange situation where. This is the process that takes place at the national competent authority. But anyway, there are some national processes in general that must be speed up to get access to medicines at the national level. And of course, we need to work with companies, but also the national competent authorities usually play a role there and can be a very important place where to have our advocacy activity going on.
Okay, thank you, Giulio and Podola. I have a comment by Tony Montserrat, and he says, I have applied to be an EMA patient partner, was accepted, filled in the DOI and all required documents. Now I am waiting, no news yet. Of course, I would like to know how long you have been waiting, Tony, if you could fill us in with this information. Oh, it has been recently, he says. I have no idea, unfortunately, on how long it might take. Giulio or David, any experience? Yeah, it was beginning of May, Tony says.
Maybe David has more experience than me in this, but it can take some months. I mean, usually the EMA starts the interaction once there is an activity going on, so maybe a workshop or something like that, or a call for a new patient representative at a committee or something. Yeah, so maybe it's just that there is no need for engaging in interaction at this moment.
The EMA has a network of patient experts, and the experts are called when necessary. So this might take months or even years until there is a process where his specific input is being required.
Okay, I hope this answers Tony's concern. I have another question by Angela Papa, which says, do you have any feedback on how this guidance is being taken up by industry? Do we know if patients are being more consulted in pre-submission activities, e.g. PAGs? That question I would give to David.
Well, actually, that's the wrong question. A good question, but in the wrong discussion. We are discussing engagement with regulators, not with industry. But as the question is here, we can say something. a lot of companies are more interested in seeking ways to involve the patients on their side, and we have seen this in EUPATI. The interest is big. Making it happen just takes time, because companies need to look at their existing processes and need to to define the way they want to do things with either with individual patients or better with the patient organization.
Okay, thank you, David. I have another question by Claudio Castagnaro, and I think this is a very, very important but very difficult question to answer. I'm just warning you, which are the European countries that currently provide reimbursement or compensation to patients' representatives or patient experts involved in regulatory processes, and in what situations?
Well, I know the answer: 0. There is no country doing that.
And if I may add, this is one of the more difficult points which have to be sorted out and really discussed further once we have an established interaction at national level between patients and the regulatory agencies. Podola, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, this is also a question that came up several times in the pilot working group with patient and consumer organizations here in Switzerland. Unfortunately, in Switzerland, as David already mentioned, we do not have a legal basis for involvement of patients in our activities and our work. So everything is voluntary on both sides, so on the side of the patients and on our side. And we are unfortunately not in the position to compensate neither travel nor the hours for the meetings here. It's a voluntary activity.
Yeah, thank you, Cordona. Even though that is not obviously very satisfactory, I would say, if I were to work with a regulatory agency and spend time and money and travel and whatnot. Anyway, there's another question. Yep.
Just to mention, what we try here at Swissmedic, we try to make it of some value by providing information, by having the meetings here in-house, by organizing everything. So this is like the contribution we want to give. Unfortunately, not money. Another kind of contribution.
Okay, I have another question by Marlena Vetterli, also from Switzerland. What happens if a medication is approved in Switzerland but doctors don't want to prescribe it due to its high cost? What can be done? And I assume, Marlena, you mean via the regulatory agency. I would like to put that to our Swiss colleagues, either David or Cordona. Whoever goes first.
Yeah. Maybe I can start. Once a product is approved by Swissmedic, that means that the company can put it on the market. But Swissmedic is not dealing with pricing and reimbursement. So pricing and reimbursement is within the mandate of another federal office here in Switzerland. It's the Federal Office for Public Health, and the company has to submit an application to get its product reimbursed. And it then comes on a list, and when it's on a list, it is getting reimbursed, sometimes to a certain extent. If it is not on the list, it's very difficult for patients, and maybe this is now the moment I hand over to David. Are there any possibilities for patients to get a solution if the product is not on the list from the Federal Office of Public Health for reimbursement?
Well, the question is actually different. The question says that doctors do not want to prescribe it due to its high cost. If that is
okay, sorry, I got that wrong.
This is indeed the case, then the doctor has decided that he feels this drug is not appropriate for the specific patient. This leaves the patient with the option to either accept what his doctor is saying, or to change the physician and see if another physician would prescribe and come to another judgment. If, however, the authorities have decided that they don't want to reimburse the drug for a specific patient, then the problem is a little bit more challenging. Then we need to wait until the authorities change their mind.
Okay, thank you, David. I have a further comment by Alexandre Bios-Duplain, and that is the French HAS reimburses patient organization members' participation since 2006. Patient organization members are paid for their participation.
Well, the French HAS, the Haute Autorité de Santé, which is the French HTA body and not the French regulator.
So we have to differentiate between the health technology assessment groups or bodies and the regulatory authorities, which, as Giulio just told us, in Italy, it is the same, essentially the same institution, the same organization, whereas in other countries it is quite separate. Any more questions? There is one by Ingrid Klingman. The guidance says under eligibility that the organization shall be representative of patients throughout the EU or European Economic Area, or that the relevant national, oops, sorry, it is jumping. I have to reread again. Eligibility that the organization shall be representative of patients throughout the EU or European Economic Area, or at the relevant national level. The individual patient sitting in the authority committee has limited access to information from other patients. How can representativeness be enabled? I would like to pass that on to Giulio.
I'm sorry, but I could not understand the question.
Okay, I will reread it, or does anyone of the others want to jump in, having understood it easily? Not really. So then I'm going to reread it. The guidance says, under eligibility, that the organization shall be representative of patients throughout the EU or at the relevant national level. The individual patient sitting in the authority committee has limited access to information from other patients. How can representativeness be enabled?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, it is a complex situation, because representativeness is not always the most important thing in regulatory activities. For example, when you are involved in scientific advice activity, the most important thing is the knowledge about your therapeutic area you're involved with. So, I mean, this of course translates into interaction with the community of patients, so it must be something related not only to your own personal experience, but also to other patients' experience. So a kind of representativeness is always needed. But it can be more or less important depending on the activity you're involved with. Some individual patients, even if they are not part of a patient organization, may have some good connections with the community of patients, in this area of social media, it is easy to create informal networks which are not recognized as organizations, but are somehow creating the interaction which is required to exchange information. I also want to say that during all the guidance preparation, the matters of how important it is to have an individual patient involved in regulatory activities who is somehow, so to say, recognized by other patients. So it is in connection with organizations or with networks of patients is really crucial. That's why patient representatives or people coming from patient organizations should be, in my view, preferred to individual patients who are not connected with any body, with any organization or network. I hope
Thank you, Giulio.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. I have a more or less a definition question by Alexandre Duplain. He says, who do you call regulators? Don't you consider public HTA agency as a regulator? David?
An HTA agency is an HTA agency. The regulator is the body that is in charge of the scientific assessment of medicines when they come to the market. They assess the effectiveness and they assess the safety, and that's their job. What HTA bodies are doing is look at the cost effectiveness in real life and decide if or give the background for the national body to accept that the drug or the intervention is reimbursed by the health system. So it's a different type of question. HTA deals with reimbursement decisions. The regulators, the regulatory bodies, deal with scientific effectiveness and drug safety.
Podola from the regulatory agency, would you like to add to this?
Well, I can only add maybe the regulatory side is also looking at quality. So the quality of a product, the efficacy and safety, these are our criteria. Mm-hmm. And once these are fulfilled, then the product is approved. But then this doesn't mean that it is of value to, or that there is added value, I should say, to therapies that are already on the market. And this is what HTA then does, this evaluation. So it's separate.
So, yeah, thank you very much. I hope this answers Alexandre's question on whether to put HTA and regulators almost like a synonym. Any more questions? Maybe David, could you extrapolate a little bit more on if you look at the different points of interaction for patient involvement with regulatory agencies, do you consider that we do have enough patients who are willing, capable, and have the time to actually participate in this interaction, like being member of a comp or of a of the PETCO, for instance?
Well, that's a good question, and actually that's something which is showing the weakness of the current system where nobody is being paid. Either people are employed by a patient organization and get their money by their organization, and the organization is rich enough to afford the absence and delegation of that member into this committee, or the person is retired for some reason, either because he or she is old or he or she is retired due to a health condition and can afford doing this type of work for free. But being a member of the Pharmacovigilance Risk Assessment Committee, I have a little bit of an idea what it means, because I was in the trial group figuring out how this could work in practice before it was being done. And I calculated that a pharmacovigilance committee meeting would take me 6 to 8 working days every month. So it's almost half of a job being there. So there are patients with the know-how, there are patients who want to go there, but the selection is limited and will be limited as long as these people have to do this in their free time and are not compensated.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm seeing no more questions.
The same applies to all other committees. I mean, the comp is the same, and the committee for advanced therapies is absolutely the same. There is no exception, and the pediatric committee is the same. There is no exception there at the EMA level. As soon as you are in a committee, it means you have a 40–50% job, and you do it for free.
Yep. I don't see any more questions coming up. We still have some time to discuss. There is one coming from Baiba Simele, and it says, number 6 on CHMP list now. Can I apply for the next round and be selected as one of 3? I'm repeating it. I am number 6 on CHMP list now. Can I apply for the next round and be selected as one of 3?
I think this person should get in touch with EMA. That's not something we...
But I assume this would be a good question to pass on to the EMA on the process.
There is a patient secretariat at the EMA on the patient website. It can be reached, and the person should get in touch with the secretariat. They will reply.
Okay, thank you, David. Are there any more questions to the guidance itself? everything seems to be fairly clear at the moment. It is probably a question of the regulators or the regulatory agencies to put it into practice across the board, I would say. Okay, if there are no more questions coming up, I would like to ask our panelists if they have a closing statement and then close the seminar. And if any of you has hindsight questions, please feel free to contact us and write them down and send them to us, and they will definitely get answered. The webinar will be, as it is recorded, be placed on our website, and you can revisit anytime you want. So to open the final round, Podola, ladies first.
Thank you, Wolf. Maybe I take up what you just said, that it is up to the regulatory agencies to implement the framework or some of it now. I fully agree. And I think also what is very important that the regulatory agencies is in close contact with the national EUPATI platform. I think there are 15 now across the European Union, so that they can profit from the EUPATI fellows that have completed the training, and maybe this is then a good opportunity to involve them in activities of the agency. So I would recommend close cooperation between regulatory agencies and the EUPATI platforms on a national level. Of course, also the EUPATI platform as a general, but I speak more for the national competent authorities now, so this would then be the national platform.
Yeah, thank you very much. Giulio?
Yes, I want to reiterate how important it can be for patients to get involved in regulatory activities. I think that it is a common feeling that regulatory bodies and authorities are not that transparent in their activities, but this is improving a lot. A lot of regulatory agencies and national competent authorities are putting in place some actions to get involved in interactions with patients. From our side, as patient representatives, members of patient organization, we should understand how to interact with them. It can be a little sometimes frustrating or confusing because competent authorities are usually based on bureaucracy, and we are based on our lives as patients, but it is important nevertheless. It is really something that can play a big role in our health. So I think this is really something to take into consideration we should work to interact more with regulatory agencies.
Thank you very much, Giulio. And the last one, our presenter, David.
Well, what could I say? The nicest moment I have seen when I was still chairing the Patient and Consumer Working Party at the EMA was when at the training almost 2 years ago, the first EUPATI fellows arrived at the European Medicines Agency, because in the past we had always gotten very motivated people who came to the agency, but for the first time we actually got trained people, and it made such a difference to discuss with these people when they had their first opportunity to come to London to a meeting. They knew what was going on and they knew what this was about, and it was a quantity loop. Very nice to see.
Thank you very much. Well, with these closing remarks, I would like to close the webinar. As I said, you're all welcome to post more questions if they come to your mind, if you have a further look at the guidance, and don't be afraid to advance to your national competent authority wherever you have a chance. Thank you very much, everybody, and good night.